Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well over there. Welcome to our final debate of the workshop and of today. My name is Ken Elimelech. I'm a postdoc research associate at Rice University.
And I'm Sylvia Herbert. I'm an assistant professor at UC San Diego. In the previous two debates, our speakers have touched on how interests from governments and industries impact the dissemination and direction of robotics research. For the third and final debate of the workshop, we will explicitly focus on this role of industry in robotics research. Making robots that work in an operational environment, being either a factory, a surgical theater, an agricultural field, or an open road, is a driving objective for many of us. Partnering between academic labs and industry can lead to advancements in both robotics research and applications.
In recent years, big technological companies such as Facebook, Amazon, and Google expressed a growing interest in the fundamental robotics research topics, the same topics that were previously only reserved to the academic world. With a huge financial investment, these companies have established independent research groups, which make tremendous discoveries and shape today's research agenda. At the same time, these companies also invest large funds in academic research through grants, awards, conference sponsorship, and by hiring academics as part-time affiliates. Is it all just a part of a big plan to protect the financial interest of these companies? Does this industrial research actually help drive the field forwards? Should academics collaborate with these companies? To settle all these questions, let us now debate whether the investment and involvement of industry giants in academia is positive. And maybe we can see it on the screen. So I'll repeat that. So our topic for this final debate is whether the investment and involvement of industry giants in robotic research in academia is positive. And I remind you again that before we begin the debate, please go to the Slido, and the link is right here, so you can vote on your opinion. I'll give you a moment to do that. All right, so luckily we have a fantastic group of debaters to help us settle this argument today. And first, arguing in favor of this statement, I'm excited to introduce Francesco Nori, who is a senior research scientist at Deepmind in London, and the current head of the Deepmind Robotics Lab. He's also currently coordinating a Horizon 2020 project on human-robot interaction. Beforehand, Francesco led the Dynamic Interaction Control research line at the Italian Institute of Technology, and was one of the main contributors to the ICRA project. His research interests seamlessly span robotics and artificial intelligence, with applications in both manipulation and locomotion. Welcome, Francesco. Hello.
Thanks a lot. I came prepared. So what I'm trying to do now is sharing my screen and go through a few.
So we'll get to that in a moment. We'll just introduce the rest of our panel. So if we can go back to our slides. All right, so to accompany Francesco on the supporting side, I'm also pleased to welcome, also from the UK, Sabine Hauert, who is an associate professor of swarm engineering at the University of Bristol. Her research focuses on making swarms for people and across scales, from nanorobots for cancer treatment to larger robots for environmental monitoring. Before joining the University of Bristol, Sabine engineered swarms of nanoparticles for cancer treatment at MIT and deployed swarms of flying robots at EPFL. Sabine is also president and co-founder of RoboHop.org and executive trustee of allhub.org. And these are two nonprofits dedicated to connecting robotics and AI communities to the public. So welcome, Francesco and Sabine, and I will now invite Sylvia to help me introduce the rest of our panel. Sylvia.
All right, so now to spice things up and argue against the resolution that the investment and involvement of industry giants in academia is positive, We have Ankur Mehta, an assistant professor at UCLA. Ankur runs the Laboratory for Embedded Machines and Ubiquitous Robots, where he works on printable robots, rapid design and fabrication, controls algorithms, and wireless sensor networks. He is a Samueli Fellow and the recipient of an NSF Career Award. Arguing against on this topic with Ankur is Professor Hsieh. Ani is an associate professor at UPenn and deputy director of the GRASP Lab. She also leads the Scalable Autonomous Robots Lab, which explores fundamental research problems that lie at the intersection of robotics, nonlinear dynamical systems theory, and uncertainty. Her work focuses on how robots interact with their environments and how the environment can be leveraged as an energy reservoir for robots. Ani is the recipient of the Owen R. Young Investigator Award and NSF Career Award. We're very excited to have Ankur and Ani spice up this debate and defy the argument that the investment and involvement of industry giants in academia is positive.
And finally, to moderate the debate, I would like to also welcome Karol Hausmann, who is a senior research scientist at Google Brain and an adjunct professor at Stanford working on robotics and machine learning. He is interested in enabling robots to autonomously acquire general purpose skills with minimal supervision in the real world. He received his PhD in computer science from the University of Southern California and master's from the Technical University of Munich. When he's not debugging robots at Google, he co-teaches the Deep Multitask and Meta Learning class at Stanford. So Karol, the stage is yours.
Hello, thank you, Ken. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you for having us. I'm a big fan of the Robotics Debates workshop. I watched the previous editions. I think this is a wonderful workshop, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. The topic is particularly close to my heart as a member of Google Brain. So the topic that we'll be discussing today is the investment and involvement of industry giants in robotics research in academia is positive. We'll start with the opening remarks. But before we do that, please remember the polls are open, so please cast your votes. We'll cast them again after the debate and see who won. But more importantly, we all want to learn something new about the topic today. All right, so let's start with maybe Francesco Nori, who came in prepared. So Francesco, if you want to share your slide and argue in favor of our statement, let me repeat that. The investment and involvement of industry giants in robotics research in academia is positive.
Thanks. I really like the topic of the debate, so I came prepared, even too excited, sharing the slides a little bit too early. Anyway, I focused on a few words on the topic of the conversation of the debate, and I will start by discussing specifically about industry, academia, and government. And I really like the view of Yuval Harari on the topic. If you haven't read the book, I really recommend you to read this amazing book because it's a nice perspective on the history of humankind. And I think what is the message that I really like about this book is that industry, academia, and governments, they're all just fictional stories that we tell ourselves in order to be able to collaborate in millions. So when we look at industry giants, as I'm assuming some of the counter debater will do, as the evil that is just looking for business and not caring about us, it's important to keep in mind that this is the result of what we are. And the industry, like governments and academia, they're all ways for us that we agreed upon in order to collaborate in big scales. And therefore, it's not the right approach to look at academia as the good thing and as governments or democratic governments as the good thing to follow, and to look at the industry as the bad. Because as I said, they are part of the society. We need to live with them. They are with us. They will ever stay with us. So we better think of them as a way for us to cooperate more than actually the evil and the bad. And the second point that I want to focus on is that I hope we all agree that the investment in robotics research is good, at least because we are in the right conference for discussing this. So we'll not discuss this, and I will assume that all the applications that we have in mind where we could help people in complicated situations, in dangerous situations, in working environments is a good investment for us. One important bit, and I'm sure that we will discuss this a lot, is that the involvement of industry might be a little bit peculiar to discuss. For sure, industry is putting a lot of pressure on the research scientists that they fund. There's definitely more business-driven kind of approach. But I also want to argue that this is a good drive, and that people can really get this drive in the right direction and drive this energy in order to improve the research outcomes. And instead of looking at the pressure that industries are putting on individuals as just a way for them to deliver bad research or even false research and publish false results just because they have pressure of the big industry. And another big topic of the debate that is fundamental to keep in mind is that government and institutions like big corporates, they are indeed the same kind of thing. They are like the fictional stories, as Yuval Harari likes to say, that allows us to collaborate in millions. But I think they have different features. And of course, since I have to defend the industry grants as opposed to the other type of grants, I would say that, first of all, even though we might think that the corporates are living on their own and we don't have power over them, I want to recall when Volkswagen did a big mistake in falsifying the results of a test on their vehicles. They got a big drop in their value. And this is just to say that we have our own say. Whenever something goes wrong, we as the society can go against and basically shut down a corporate if we want, because as I said, these are just fictional stories. We can completely rule them out from the market. And on the other side, I wanted to point out the government might be seen as the good way of doing research and sort of the democratic way of investing research money. But I also think that they are slow. And I wanted to point out that the world we are living in is moving really fast and is sometimes moving too fast. And I brought up two examples here of technologies that developed and the society was unprepared and governments were unprepared to rule them in the right way. Airbnb is one, a big debate about paying taxes versus offering certain type of services, and big hotels and big hotel chains, they complained about Airbnb because the technology was there, people were renting out their apartments, and this was a big impact for the society. And Uber is the same. You probably know that in Italy, Uber is not yet allowed to work and operate just because it's so disruptive. And the technology is there, but sometimes governments are so slow at reacting to these new technologies that it's important in a world that is moving so fast that we also get the contribution of industries, which are instead quite fast at reacting to the changing society. And last but not least, I want to point out that industry is very driven. So it's definitely focused on research that has an application so that can deliver in the short term and with high impact. Well, academia sometimes is a little bit on the other front, investing on things that are extremely difficult to achieve and extremely unlikely, but at the same time, they can have a big reward in the future. So they are sort of, in a sort of sense, complementary, but I really believe that it's fundamental to have also the industry contribution to the research we are doing. And that's the last slide that I have.
Right, thank you, Francesco, for the opening statement. Next, Sabine, would you also like to argue in favor of our statement, the investment and involvement of industry giants in robotics research in academia is positive?
Sure. So for me, it comes down to what has an impact in the real world. As academics, we spend so much time in the laboratory laying the foundations for robotics, inventing the future, with demonstrations that are within the limited capabilities that we have within our laboratory. And this work is important, it's exciting, and much of the technology and the skills used by industry giants actually were born in academic research labs. And so we should be proud of this fundamental work. And sometimes we also get stuck in rabbit holes as researchers, chasing small performance increases on made-up tasks that have little immediate bearing on the real world. And so I think it's helpful for us as researchers to take a step back and ask ourselves how the research we do goes on to have an impact in the real world. Well, either we can translate it through startups, and it's worth noting that many of these industry giants in robotics were startups not that long ago. And so being against them is like saying we're against our own new baby startups succeeding. And so it's worth thinking about these things that come of our lab. We want them ultimately to become some of these tech giants. And the other option is that we translate our research through existing industry. And this could be done through transfer of skills, our PhDs, our postdocs, other faculty within our teams. And surely we want our teams, if it's right for them, to go on and have exciting research jobs in industry. Or tech companies could otherwise license our technology or collaborate with us on research projects. And the resources that these companies have means that the ideas that are born in these research labs, these fundamental ideas, can grow, can mature, and can finally become products that have an impact on the real world. So really this involvement from big tech, ideally, gives our ideas wings. And you really just had to look at the exhibit hall this year at ICRA to see these robots becoming a reality. And hopefully when you saw these robots, it reminded of you of when you were in the research lab and some of the research you were doing and how it contributes to some of these future products. So I've been lucky to experience collaboration with industry over the past 3 years. We've been working with Toshiba, which is not one of the tech giants you named before, but it's still a pretty big tech company. And we've been building a swarm testbed for intralogistics. And so in doing that, that's changed the way we do some of the research within my team. We no longer necessarily focus on the lab-based foraging inspired from ants, which was very theoretical. We're now asking how swarms can move food in a food bank or on a shop floor. We're wondering how users can interact with the swarm, how they can trust it, and what performance metrics would convince industry that distributed intelligence can compete in a meaningful way with centralized control. And we're wondering what such swarms would look like if they were deployed in the real world to power, city-scale logistics or city-scale circular economies. And this opens up new fundamental research questions that were simply not there before we engaged with these industrial collaborations. So why the tension? Why are we even asking if the involvement of big tech giants in academic research is a good thing? And I think fundamentally it comes down to competition, right? We compete for talent, they win. We compete for resources, they win. We compete for top research, they win. But what if we flip these arguments? So they need a new pool of talent. We get more funding as academics to train PhD students. And on top of that, these PhD students have a job in industry at the end of the road. So we win too in that context. They have more resources to scale up our research ideas beyond what is possible in the lab. And that then allows us to show that the technology we've developed is useful in the real world. So we get more funding because the area all of a sudden is recognized as useful. So in the end, we win as well on that front. And they put out exciting state-of-the-art research and tools, but we get to use them and the field gains in visibility. We win again. So as a result of this competition, I think academia has the potential to train more talent. Our area is recognized as useful and valuable out in the real world. We get new tools and resources to move our own research further. And what should we do with all these things? Well, we should do what we always do, which is to do something new, something exciting, something that pushes the next frontier, blue sky ideas, and hopefully become the tech giants in the next wave of innovation. So really, this is about the wheel of innovation and how industry does displace ideas from the lab to the real world, but hopefully that makes space for academia to explore new frontiers.
Thank you, Sabine. Next, let's have Annie, who's arguing against our proposition. The investment and involvement of industry giants in robotic research in academia is positive. Take it away, Annie.
Okay, so I'm going to put on my Philadelphian hat, okay? And I'm going to start with the statement that fundamentally there is a mismatch between academia and industry's mission. And this is sort of seen, so we are all here at ICRA in Philadelphia, and RASP Lab is actually housed at the University of Pennsylvania. Penn is the brainchild of Benjamin Franklin's idea 250 years ago, right? The idea is that he wanted to establish a university that would put knowledge to use in service of, quote, mankind, one's country, friends, and family, end quote. This means that as academics, we are morally and ethically, right, sort of tasked to combine education and research to build and apply knowledge to improve lives and transform the world. As academics, we have to pursue transformative research that is high risk because these endeavors may not have an obvious short-term impact, right? But because we believe in the long term that it is going to benefit society as a whole. So this, let me make sure I have it right. And so this, a great example is the recent mRNA COVID-19 vaccines. In fact, the original technology was developed here at Penn at the School of Medicine, okay? The work was actually done in the 80s and the early 90s. And it is only now, right? So if we think about 2021, 2022, that we've seen large scale usage and deployment to impact society overall, okay? Which means that the ethos of academia is fundamentally in conflict with that of industry, which at the end of the day, right, is driven by profits or the need to generate profits within a short time frame. Now, yes, it is possible, right, to have successful collaborations between academia and industry. In fact, my group, right, has worked successfully with industry before as well as currently, okay? So in the most ideal, let's consider the most ideal case where the academics and the industrial partners' missions do align, okay? And in this case, everybody's benefiting. We're doing, we're generating products that are good for society. But then the question arises, right? If this work was work that the industry would already, they would have done themselves, then we have to ask the question, are the academics, and more specifically, are the graduate students, right, somehow sort of coming out of this arrangement, because of fundamentally there's a different compensation structure between academics and industry, okay? So let's not, so that's one aspect. Another aspect is accessibility of this technology that is being produced, right? So as we know, many underrepresented and economically challenged communities often have the hardest time to access sort of cutting edge technology. And so at the end of the day, who's, sort of how do we reconcile this discrepancy? And so I think, so that's, because of these issues, right, I do believe that there is fundamentally this mismatch creates conflict and in fact can set up pretty significant conflicts of interest. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. And as last, we will have Ankur Mehta, who's also arguing against our proposition.
Great, thanks, Karol. I'd like to start by commending Francesco for those slides. I think they provided a very, very nice overview of the space, and I like breaking it down by words. But I do notice that you highlighted almost every word in that phrase in the topic that we're addressing, but you missed one, and that word is the final word, positive. What does it mean to be positive? And I'd like to focus on that a little bit. We here are we're engineers, we may be artists, we're creators. We are all familiar with this concept of trade-offs, and we have, no matter what efforts we try to go through, there'll always be competing metrics. Maybe putting it into the framing of robotics, since that's where we're here, we're going to have rewards that are associated with costs. And without a doubt, industry involvement and industry participation comes with rewards, but those rewards have associated costs. And we can't begin to assess the question of positive impact without seeing what the impact of those costs may be. And so to assess those costs, let's start by considering the nature of involvement. What is the ways in which industry participates in the academic story? And of course, there's the big one, which is the infusion of resources into our approach. Now, resources can take the form of funding, can take the form of hardware or compute resources or a number of things, but that's not the only involvement. That may be the investment part, but there's more. There's also personnel resources. And industry can provide, of course, the equivalent of program managers, those that supply the funding and evaluate the use of the funding. But industry is also responsible for PIs, for those who dictate the course of research and the direction of research. It's also responsible for the supply of research scientists, those who execute and do the research. And also technicians, those who support the research and provide the efforts that make this all go to completion. And then once that research has gone to completion, There's another element of industry involvement, and that's in the rewards for the completion of the research. Where if you are perhaps a career academician, if you're somebody who relies on the value of your work, unfortunately as it may be, that metric is assigned perhaps by citations. And of course, industry is responsible for a large number of citations, responsible for providing the feedback and the reward associated with the research. If you're passing through academia as a stepping stone on your way to other objectives, industry provides jobs. It provides opportunities for after you leave academia. And so ultimately, what we have is that this involvement of industry is an entire stack, full stack influence before, during, and after the academic process. And what this means is that you now have a small number of agents, a small number of industry giants that are providing an outsized influence over the course of academic process and over the course of research. Now, we have words for this. We have words when there's a small number of entities that are responsible for driving the course of the general zeitgeist. In the case of industry, we may call it, in the case of the partnership with industry and government, we may call it regulatory capture. There's another term that's been sort of in more in our awareness recently, this idea of an oligopoly. These are words that in our life have a very negative connotation. They take on this negative tenor, and there's a reason for that. It's because with this kind of power, this outsized influence, the directions start to align. The directions, the interests of academia start to move towards the interests of industry. And again, going back to this idea that there's a lot of positive outcomes, a lot of value that can be generated by this. That's all predicated on the fact that these interests, the academic interests and the industry interests may align. And maybe we can start with that assumption. I'll take it for granted for now that these interests do align. There's still some issues here. And that is, it comes from, as Ani mentioned, the difference in outcomes, the difference in goals. As academics, we should be executing our efforts in the service of humanity, society, the global good. Meanwhile, industry operates in the service of profits. Now, when those both go sort of in the same direction, that's great. We may have things that on surface look to be a worthwhile, a helpful partnership, but there's still consequences to that partnership. For one, there's the choice of what problems are worth looking at, what problems are worth solving. And of course, this is an age-old question when it comes to support, when it comes to the source of research resources. But now, as we mentioned, industry is not just any other source of support and source of resources. They provide, influence throughout the entire process. This is a very, a very large voice that may drown out other opinions when it comes to what is an important or valuable problem to solve. But it gets a little bit more insidious than that. And it's when it comes to not just a choice of problems, but a choice of solutions as well. And these two are tied in a close feedback loop. We can see, industry is well poised to solve a certain collection of problems for which the only solutions require a considerable amount of resources that industry alone has. But it starts from there and it goes further. Where now, when you have all of these resources, you have a set of tools that apply there, you may go looking for a set of problems that can be addressed by those tools. And as you go looking, you may find them. You may spend some time not only looking and finding, but generating your own problems that are only solvable with the excessive resources that these industry giants may have. And again, what we end up going to is a shift in focus generated by this influence, by the impact of industry participation, a focus away from problems and into solutions. And there's a very clear metric of this, a very clear consequence. I remember ICRA, I believe it was close to 5 years ago, where there was at the banquet, they announced that for the first time in almost the 30-year history of ICRA, the #1 keyword in the papers submitted to the conference had shifted away from SLAM, a problem that needed addressing a solution, to learning, a solution that needed problems. And so what we've seen is that there's a shift in intent and focus already generated by this influence of resources. What happens when we move to this? There's there's negative outcomes to this this direction. On the one hand, this results in bad science. We're scientists. We approach things with the scientific method, where we try to, as academics, we're intending to explore the space of solutions and problems and try to find understanding, try to find meaning across all of these relationships. What we don't try to find is a story. We don't try to make up an excuse for how we apply a known problem to a known solution, try to justify a single point within this space. Another consequence to this is that, you know, this point in the space that we're looking at is something that requires the resources that these industry giants provide. And what we end up with is a runaway arms race. We have problems that require ever more complicated, ever more costly solutions. We have solutions that generate ever more costly problems. And ultimately, what ends up happening is the participation in the research story becomes narrower and narrower. From having industry as a benefactor, we have industry as a gatekeeper. They alone contain supply the resources that can be used to address the problems that we look at. And this becomes a much broader negative. And I think Sabine was mentioning that this is like the industry is useful to take a step back and help us look at impact in the real world. Impact doesn't come just from technological solutions. Impact comes from societal implications. And the implications of erecting new barriers to entry, new more inhibition to participation in the conversation around robotics research is a significant societal ill. Now, speaking of societal ills, I want to wrap this up. I know I've been speaking for quite some time, but I want to go back and revisit that assumption that industry and academic interests may align in pursuit of different goals even. But I would argue that fundamentally they don't align. And this comes from sort of an implementation, the practice of achieving the disparate goals, as Ani mentioned. We have seen sort of in many situations where the pursuit of profits is necessarily generated alongside or is necessarily incompatible with societal benefits, societal goals. And so, you know, we can see this at sort of a broad level where over the past years, especially in the past the 2 years of pandemic, there's been an ever increasing wealth gap and income inequality, a gap in the quality of life between those that have and those that have not. More specifically tied towards the tech companies the industry giants that we're talking about, there's issues of perhaps the surveillance state, of psychological influence and impact, of labor exploitation, and again, mismatch in the participants in the solutions and the benefactors of the problems. Ultimately, these are all societal challenges and societal problems that are deeply intertwined with these industry giants that we are discussing here in terms of their participation in academia. And what happens when we start including them in this academic story? As we start connecting our reputations as academics as these sources of societal benefit, the goals, the targets that we have being this lofty ambitions of serving friends, family, and nation. We now use our reputation, we use our 250 years of generated social goodwill to whitewash the reputations of these industries that have at their core generated a large number of societal ills. And so ultimately pulling this all together, sure, there are benefits. There are absolutely positive outcomes in terms of performance metrics that come out of partnership with industry. But the costs far outweigh any of these benefits in terms of individual science, in terms of aggregate academics, and in terms of societal outcomes. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ankur. This concludes our opening statements and starts our moderated debate. I will encourage all the viewers to submit your questions on Slido. We'll be looking at those throughout the debate. Yes, so you can join the conversation here. So I would like to start with Francesco, because Ankur referred to his slides directly, asking about one word that wasn't highlighted, which was the word positive. And Ankur talked a little bit about how what are the costs that come with potential benefits of having industry involved in academic research. Francesco, how would you respond to that?
I wanted to make a couple of comments. So the first one is that I think the view that companies are primarily driven by profit, as in profit is bad, and is not something that should be we should aim for. Specifically, we want to approach or invest some money in research, is actually I think leading us in the wrong way. Governments as well, they are entities that look after profit. They need to have profit for having the tools and all the basically the means to help the population and to be able to sustain themselves. And sometimes there are also governments that are very driven by big corporates under the hood. So I think the problem of sort of finger pointing at profit as a bad thing, I think it's not really right posed, because profit is good for the good of the society, and in general, it doesn't mean necessarily that aiming for profit is a bad thing. On the other side, I think another important point is that another point that was resonating a lot on the debate is that we see as big corporates and big industries as the only possibilities to have big money to be invested in research. This is the case perhaps more recently for a number of reasons, but it's not always the case. And there are areas where governments and big institutions are investing a lot of money in order to pursue very important research activities. Of course, nuclear fusion is one where basically no big companies has a big stake, but governments are building big particle accelerators and big plasma fusion centers, just to mention a few of these applications. And if you take the Apollo mission as well, was primarily funded by the US government and led to an enormous impact on the society later on. But still, it was driven by government, which within big funds and big investments. So in a sense, it is true that at this stage, the capitalism has brought and had led big companies to become extremely powerful. They can be as powerful as the United States, but there are a lot of countries as well that have the same power. So perhaps the fact that money are also shared with companies is not a bad thing in a sense, because it allows us to diversify the way we use this money for research into different ways. Of course, governments usually tend to go for applications that will deliver on the long term, and then companies are more on the short term. And the research we are doing for companies is definitely different from the one that we can do when we cooperate with governments. But in the end, the portfolio of alternatives that we have, I think, is quite rich, and this is necessary to have this richness so that we can focus on different things.
Thank you, Francesco. I'm curious, Annie or Ankur, do you have any response to that?
Sure, I can start, and I'll pass it on to Annie for a little bit. I think there's this notion, and I think Francesco, you started out by sort of describing a dichotomy, perhaps profit. This notion that either profit is good or profit is bad. I view profit and sort of the direction or the interest in profit as amoral. It does not have a value judgment. Profit just is. It is a metric. It is a quantity that we can use to measure outcomes. What we have to ask ourselves is the flip side of the question: does good lead to profit? And the answer is certainly yes. Does all good lead to profit? And the answer to that is absolutely no. There are plenty of things that are generally viewed as positive values that don't generate profit. And then the more direct question is: does bad lead to profit? There's things that we sort of can that we can generally agree upon as a negative outcome can still lead to profit. And that's where this idea of profit being amoral, it doesn't distinguish. It doesn't separate between them. And so that's not to say that all profit will generate both good and bad outcomes, but it can. And therefore, the single-minded drive towards profit must be tempered by something that provides a different voice. And I think in the end, Francesco, you wound up with this notion of voice, of sort of a richness in the story where you have long-term outcomes and you have short-term outcomes. You will have profit-motivated outcomes and non-profit motivated outcomes. Ultimately, so we can all move towards the positive value generation. But for that, we cannot have voices that are considerably larger than other voices. And that's where this comes from. Speaking of power, it's not just a matter like, we have power associated with countries, with force, with might. We also have power associated with money. And now all of a sudden the stories get intertwined. And this profit transiting to power starts building a loop around which, perhaps the richness starts to get diluted.
So I'm just going to add that. So I completely agree with Francesco that profit is not necessarily a bad thing, right? But I think the corporate accountability, is an important factor. So in the sense that, well, who can make a corporation accountable? It could be the shareholders, the owners, maybe the consumers. But keep in mind that who owns stocks these days, right? It's mostly people who are, upper middle class. It's oftentimes the economic disadvantaged who do not have the privilege to be owning stock and benefit in this wealth accumulation. On the other hand, governments, is particularly democratically elected governments, right, that fund research, that research is taxpayers' money. It's funded through, everyone's, all the citizens' taxes. And the citizens do have a say in how governments choose to allocate and invest that money through their vote. So at the end of the day, the way governments and corporations, and obviously democratically elected governments and corporations are held accountable, is fundamentally different. And therefore, this can, in fact, result in potentially negative outcomes.
Yeah, thank you, Annie. I'm curious, Sabine, you mentioned some examples of how industry and academia can work together, and how industry can even inspire some problems in academia. But then on the other hand, we've heard Annie and Ankur. Annie mentioned that there's a fundamental mismatch in goals between academia and industry. And both Annie and Ankur mentioned that the amount of control that is in hands of a relatively small group is also a negative outcome there in industry. I'm curious, how would you respond to that?
If researchers see themselves as the protectors of social good, which they should, then they need that social good to be actionable. And if they're just doing that on their own, no one will know about it. And the products that roll out of industry will continue to be the products that roll out of industry. Those are the ones that the public interface with, and those are the ones that are going to determine what social good is done by these technologies. I think the notion that industry influences us, and as a result, we get bad science, might happen, and that's something to be mindful of. But I actually think I have power in these collaborations as well, and to a certain extent, I have that power to influence industry. And so we are a small pool of experts in some of these disciplines, which is why industry needs our resources, our intellectual resources, and what we have to bring to the table influences the way they do their industry work. And so just as an example of that, in those examples that I gave with our collaboration on swarming, I have to fight back a little bit to say why swarming is useful, how it should be designed so that it's carefully deployed, how you do that in a responsible way. And that then trickles up, I hope, to a level that might take that into account. So it might be naive, but I do think that we need to take it from a position of power and come into these collaborations with big tech with the idea that we're going to change things. And actually, a lot of the highlighting of bad practice sometimes from these big tech companies has also come with an awareness that things should be done better. And that's something that these big tech companies need to take on board. So I would sort of flip it and say we need to realize what power we do have as academics in these collaborations, and do it so that social good is not just done because we're academics in a corner somewhere doing our own research, but it's done in a way that it gets embedded in the products that get deployed.
Thank you. Yeah, so it sounds like this collaboration gives us a channel for academics. It gives a channel to actually drive impact in the real world and influence these companies. How would you respond to that, Annie?
So I actually, agree with Sabine, right? Fundamentally, our core mission as academics is one of education, and we are providing industry, right, with, their talent. And so as academics, it becomes important for us to teach the person as a whole and not just focus on the technical skills. And this is why things like ethics, and including ethics in the curriculum, I think becomes even more important, especially in this day and age. So I absolutely agree that there is a space, right? And despite this mismatches, there are successful collaborations. But I think this is a unique opportunity for us academics to be able to change the culture of industry in some ways, because we are the ones who have direct impact on the students, and these students are the ones that eventually go into industry.
Thank you. And Francesco, you have your hand raised.
Yes, I wanted to follow on the point raised by Annie on looking at democracies as a better way to have our own say in order to decide where our money or our power is eventually, how it is used and how it is distributed across the population. I think it's not necessarily true in general that the outcome of democracy and the outcome of government is in general better than companies. There are, especially recently, we have seen how the organizing millions of people is difficult. That can lead to very bad consequences for us and for the society. Because the democracy is not working, because certain governments, they are not, even though theoretically they are following certain types of structures, eventually they can lead and go in different directions. And this has been all around the globe. It's not given that that's the best way of working. And the fact that some big corporates have a lot of power, which is comparable to the one of big countries, I think this doesn't imply that they are organized in a bad way and they don't have to respond to the society themselves. The example that I raised before was the one of Volkswagen. So Volkswagen did a mistake, and the society decided to basically remove a little bit of the power that they gained with time. And eventually they got back to where they are just because the society forgot about what they did. So I think we have a power. It's extremely difficult to use it, but it is also extremely difficult to use our power and our ideas within democracy. We might have good ideas, but still some bad governors are entitled to rule a country and do very bad things, like those that exactly we didn't want in the first place when we voted them. So I'm not sure that the point of saying, oh, democracy is the best way we have to have a say on what we do is the only way. I think now, especially in these times, democracy has been challenged a lot, and even the way governments are organized has been challenged a lot. So I'm not sure. I wouldn't say that following again from my point of view before, that governments are good or democracy is good and corporates and capitalism is bad. They are part of what we are, and they are the reason why we arrived where we arrived. So we better not point the fingers and just say bad, evil, and good in a very clear, with no shades of gray.
Ankur, this is, I think, in direct response to what you said before. I'm curious, how would you respond?
Okay. Right. Yeah. I think there are a few points that I wanted to make response to all this. First of all, there's certainly much more discussion that we can have on the efficacy of democratic governments and our particular implementation of the democratic government. So, I think that's a much longer discussion for some other day. But I do want to talk about this notion of power and of perhaps our individual power in effecting change. I like how I put it that in terms of the change that we need to make to sort of start including ethics into the conversation and making sure that we have an understanding of this. I think, Sabine, everything that you had just said, I could not agree more. They're just making impact, making change, and doing things for societal good, locked away in an ivory tower is no more useful than just than reading about it. In order to make an actual impact, you need to have the implementation. You need to have perhaps the influence that industry could bring. But I think, going back to actually Sabine's opening statement, where we're thinking about this in terms of winning and losing. And I think that was sort of a very clear illustration of how this power is not actually there. It's an illusion. Perhaps as as another one of the fictional stories that Francesco brought up, where we can certainly see that, or we can claim that individuals may have an influence over industry giants and over the direction that corporate outcomes may take. But in the past the past couple months, in the past couple of years, we've definitely seen what may happen when an individual strays a little bit too far away from the core company line. And then we get to see who has the real power in this relationship. This idea of we can view our particular interactions as a win-win on both sides. The views that were presented, this idea that, well, they're winning in terms of research resources, they're winning in terms of the benefit of the outcomes, but we could view it in a different way. That, in my mind, struck a very similar analogy to Shenmue the killer whale at SeaWorld, where certainly if the SeaWorld organizers say do a backflip and Shenmue does a backflip, well, Shenmue will get some head pats and a few fish. That's a win, isn't it? Except it isn't. And that's where we are operating right now. We certainly could have more power. We can certainly starve out industry when they don't do things in what aligns with ethical code. But we haven't done that because we view it as we should accept their scraps. We should say that it's good enough that they give us the moderate amount of funding that we get, and then they take the profits from those results, and again carve up a little bit so that we can continue our meager existence, and we should be thankful for it and call it a win. I think that is the thing that needs to change. We do have the power. We have the influence over the incoming stream of engineers. We have the sort of the social influence, the social capital to say that as academics we have a little bit of a stronger voice, and we should use that, and we should make sure that we don't continue the involvement of industry the way it has been, where we're content with trying to pretend that we're getting a win when we're actually not.
Thank you, Ankur. Sabine, you mentioned before that you do feel like you do have power in some of these relationships with the companies. Ankur seems to believe that there is more power to be had, and maybe you don't have as much power as it might appear. I'm curious, what do you think about that?
There's a before and after. So those wins, I think, are real wins. They're not just scraps. I think we were going from a position of not having necessarily those resources of funding to train new PhD students, of having the resources just in terms of equipment, in terms of software, and in terms of the impact that we can have at the end of the day. So those for me are real wins compared to what I might not have had without these industrial collaborations. So I think the wins are real. Where's my power? I can also just not pursue this, right? I could also just go back and focus on my academic, pure academic work and fundamental work, which I do on other projects, and that would be absolutely fine. I don't entirely depend on this relationship to be able to progress what I want to progress. So to a certain extent, my power lies in that freedom, and the freedom that we still have as academics to choose what we want to engage with. And I think it's a good point that we need to figure out how to get more from these partnerships. And maybe that's something that we could have as a consensus going forward, is there's a way to do this right if we manage to get more from the relationship and it's done in a respectful way. But it's part of a process. You don't go there from zero to everything in one shot. And we need to learn what works as a collaboration.
Great, thank you, Sabine. We have a few questions from the audience. I thought that one in particular is quite interesting, and I would like to ask Annie this question. It's an anonymous question that says, what's a better barometer for research progress, stock prices or citations? I think we mentioned stock prices.
Either one of them are good barometers for research progress. I think this is a very hard question. I think the academic community is also grappling with this right now. I think, this is the part where it takes time and effort from everyone's part to do good scholarship. That means that, peer review process has to be done properly. Reviewers have to do their part, not just the researchers. and the associate editors and the editors have to do their part. And it's a community effort. I think that right now, this current publish or perish culture is really putting, right, this peer-reviewed system really to the test. And I think I think everybody at this point is suffering from information overload, and trying to be able to do our due diligence when we're looking at a new problem, when we're trying to get into a new space and do a thorough literature review is becoming harder and harder. And I think these are open challenges right now for us and for academics in general, because this is important, because this is also part of the training good scientists and good engineers and good researchers in teaching them how to think critically and how to execute, doing the kinds of things, doing the right set of studies and the right kind of analysis. I think this is a this is a completely open question. Anybody has some good ideas? I'm open to listening.
I actually, before we go to the closing remarks, I would like to ask one more question from the audience. That is the most popular question. And I would like to ask Francesco that question. And this is more about robotics research. So does pressure from industry to focus on short-term gains in robotics research specifically hinder creativity? This is also something that Ankur mentioned in the past with the example of SLAM versus learning, and how the robotics research agenda has shifted towards learning because of that pressure from industry. I'm curious if you agree with the sentiment of that question, that it hinders creativity, Francesco.
I'm not sure I'm the right person to answer this question. I actually moved at Deepmind just because I thought that learning is the perfect fit for robotics. So I think this is one of these situations where it's a win-win strategy. I think a lot of the bottlenecks in my previous research investments were suffering of problems that I think can really be solved with machine learning, and specifically with more recent results on big models. So I really think that it's a risk that a specific technology is sort of the hammer, and people go around searching for the nail to use with that particular hammer. But in this case, it's one of these situations where the hammer is so powerful and horizontal that I really think it's a good investment for a lot of different science disciplines. And actually at Deepmind, we are doing a lot of this. We are trying to see what benefits we can bring to the society on different science disciplines just by using a machine learning as a main ingredient. And I think robotics is one of these that will benefit. And I really believe it will do a step change as soon as we find the key to enable a good use of machine learning in the scope of robotics.
Great, thank you. I'm being told that we are a little bit short on time, so we'll start the closing remarks now. I'd like to start with Sabine. Please, you have 2.5 minutes, I think. Please go ahead with your closing remarks.
I think this was a helpful conversation. I think we're not miles apart, actually, between the for and the against positions. If done right, it always comes down to this. If done right, if done responsibly, if we train people to be ethical and to think of the social good, then we have the potential to engage in these collaborations with industry, to influence what they're doing, to make sure that our ideas, our fundamental research ultimately have the impact that we want, and that nurture these products that come out into the real world, so that the society that we aim to cater for actually sees the results of our research. So there's tensions on how to do that. But if we could do it right, I think that we'll be able to address some of the comments from both sides. And those incentives might sound like they're not aligned right now, in terms of profit versus being able to pursue sort of the greater good. But fundamentally, these profits, we live in a society that does care and does criticize companies that don't follow the societal good. And so that's something that we're able to, is these companies do get punished further down the line if they're not able to live up to the expectation that we're putting onto them. So I'm hopeful, basically, that we can continue these industrial collaborations. I'm hopeful that it'll make our research better, that it'll make our research impactful. And I think it'll give us more space actually to do some of the fundamental research that we really want to be doing because we have more resources and talent injected in the system.
Thank you. Let's hear from the other side. Ankur, please go ahead with your closing remarks.
Thank you. I also want to echo what Sabine mentioned, that we're not miles apart. I think we all have very like-minded approaches to this problem. We all want to do good. We all want to do the best that we can for research, for academia, for society, for all of the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. And I think we're all fairly well in agreement as well as the potential, the benefits, or at least the potential benefits that partnerships with industry could provide in this endeavor. And I think, I couldn't put it better than what Sabine said. We need to make sure that this is done right. If it's done right, there's great benefit, there's great potential for positive outcome from this. But the key is that we cannot ignore the costs. And there are a number of very real costs that are coming out of the current process of interaction with industry. And we have the power, as long as we focus on on taking that power and using it to steer this interaction in a way that focuses on the benefits and addresses and minimizes those costs. There's one that I want to use this opportunity to bring up the one cost that we didn't really touch on much in the discussion, this idea of participation. And this is where I think the notion of resources and profits all feed into the barriers to entry, barriers to accessibility. How do we broaden the conversation? How do we get more people involved in this discussion, involved in robotics education, involved in robotics research? How do we reach more of the population so that when we look at the costs, we have a more global view of the costs? When we look at the potential benefits, we can actually view the benefits to society as a whole. And I think that's a conversation that can only happen starting with academics in sort of divorced from the grubby, dirty, money world of industry giants, corporate influence, and so on.
Thank you, Ankur. Francesco, would you like to present your closing remarks?
I think I really like what we discussed about the power that we have, as researchers. And I don't think it's really important whether we are working with an industry, whether we are working in a corporate, whether we are working with a government. It doesn't really matter. We as researchers in robotics, we do have a power, but individually we don't have much power. We need to have agreements on how to use that power to make big changes. If we want to really change global warming, we really need to coordinate billions of people in order to do step changes, in order to avoid what is unavoidable at the moment. And I think the same holds true for the kind of research we are doing. No matter who is funding us, we are the gatekeeper of research because we are the researchers in robotics. And I think it's fundamental to increase and raise the bar of global awareness of the ethical use of what we are doing. If we don't do that, we will regret not doing that before once things will change in a way that we can't change them back. So I think that's really important for us to create more discussion, have more debates. Eventually, we are the one leading the research. So we always have the power to say, no, I don't want to do this research. But the only way to have really exploit the power and use the power behind our no, we need to be all of us united in saying no of using certain technologies for certain reasons. I think that's really important. No matter where the funds will come from, they always come from us as a society working together to research something new.
Thank you, Francesco. And Annie, would you like to present your closing remarks?
So thank you, first of all, to the organizers and to our moderator and to my fellow debaters for this unique and wonderful opportunity for us to come together and discuss this very important topic together. Even though, so I think I completely agree with my fellow debaters that even though there is this fundamental mismatch in terms of the horizon between our views of the length and the time it takes to do research and the impact between sort of academia and industry, I think at the end of the day, right, they are very complementary and there's a space for all of us. As academics, especially those of you in the audience who are interested in going down this route, I encourage you to think long, right, long term. They have a big vision. You may not be able to get it done right away, but that's really the joy of and the benefit of being in this academic setting is you'll have the time, right, to get there. Those of you who are in industry, thank you for the work that you're doing. And at the end of the day, regardless of whether we're in academia or in industry, I think as engineers, our job is to think big and to think broad and to sort of, be ambitious in regards to the good that we can come, bring to society. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie. That's a wonderful closing remark, wonderful message. All right, let's take a look at our polls. Can we see them on a slide? We will have the polls before the debate and after the debate. All right, so just to repeat, our statement was the investment and involvement of industry giants in robotics research in academia is positive. I see post-debate polls are now open, so please cast your votes. I think we saw the results for a second, but you have a chance now to change these results. So please cast your votes right now. All right, and as we are waiting for the votes to come in and to see the results, we'll reveal them in a second. Let's start our debrief. So I'm actually curious about some of you have been arguing for, some of you have been arguing against. There's been quite a lot of voices saying that these two are actually complementary and we should work together on making sure that we do have enough power as researchers, whether we influence research through academic route or through industry. But I'm curious, what is your opinion? Were you just arguing just for the sake of arguing because that was the position that you were given? But are you actually in favor or against the proposition we had? Whoever wants to take it first, please go ahead.
All right, I can go. I think I'll bring back to the very beginning of this debate when Francesco, you went through and highlighted every word. I didn't want to bring this up too much in the interest of not getting too lawyerly, too Bill Clinton about this, but there was another word you didn't highlight, which is the word is. And my fundamental personal belief is currently that is the current level of interaction and investment of industry giants in research if the question is this participation is positive? My answer would be no. Everything I've been arguing is that the current state of being is not positive. But if we change that to say the industry participation engagement can be positive, well, with that I'd probably have to give a resounding maybe. And for that I think I would defer to Ani's call to action. There's enough potential out there that if we put our minds to it, if we put as everyone in the audience, everyone who's here works towards making this the positive benefit, positive outcomes that we could foresee, then there's a lot of benefit to be had. So we put in that effort, and I think that's the direction that we should be always have in our minds as we approach this question.
Well, I would just say full disclosure, I generally try to avoid industrial sponsored research, not because of any philosophical issue, but mostly just because I don't really want to have to deal with any kind of any additional grant reporting responsibilities that are given to me. So, that's really, I will take the funding with the least amount of administrative work. How's that?
It's a very non-controversial statement, I think. Sabine.
I think my position was broadly truthful, but maybe not as blanket as I made it sound like. So for me, it doesn't matter if it's industry or government, or I'm interested in specific problems that I'd like to solve that would have impact. And so it's not so much about that whether it's industry or not, it's whether it's the right problem to be focusing on. So for a given big tech company, I might be very much against working with them for whatever historical reason or for the given application discussed, but I might be very happy to work for that some company if it's solving something that will do good. So it's not about industry, it's about what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Francesco, what do you think?
I think in general, what I know, and that's why I had the Theranos picture in my presentation, is that things can really go wrong, especially when there is pressure on researchers to deliver. So I think that industry and the way the industrial business is organized can have a bad influence on the research outcomes of what we are doing. At the same time, I think I'm privileged to work in a sort of idealistic situation where I feel like my research is even better guided by the ecosystem I live in currently, and I think I can include Google and Deepmind in this whole ecosystem, just because I really have the feeling that I don't have the pressure that in other contexts I might have, and at the same time I am relatively I'm actually quite surprised by the amount of freedom that I have as a researcher while working within the alphabet ecosystem. But I know very well that this can go wrong, and news articles are full of controversial situations where things weren't that clean, and that research outcomes were heavily biased by the collaboration and the influence that the industry had in that particular research project. So I think we should really try to help by having additional rules and be sure that the research is fair, that the outcomes can be published when they are achieved, and that they are for the good of the society, and they're ethical also in the way they are delivered to the society.
Thank you,
I'm
Francesco.
just going to throw out one more thing here, since I think we're all, given the fact that we're all, the debaters here are all academics, right? I think at the end of the day, it's really about what is the good thing for the students, right? As mentors, where it's, it's about that opportunity. And so I think it's when you know that there's an opportunity there that it's a unique opportunity for the student, oftentimes, that is what's going to drive us to be able to say yes or no to certain things.
Thank you, Annie. And thank you to all of you, to all of the debaters. I thought these were wonderful arguments. We went quite in depth in some of them. We talked a lot about how these two avenues can be complementary, how the goals might be misaligned, how we can change things moving forward, how we can have more power as researchers. I think with all of this, we are actually ready with our poll results. Could we pull up our poll results right now? All right, here we go. So again, our statement was the investment and involvement of industry giants in robotics research in academia is positive. Before the debate, 65% of the voters said that they agree with that sentence. 21% were undecided and 14% disagreed. After the debate, 54% agreed with the statement. That's a change of 11% less voters. 38% disagree, 24% compared to before the debate, and 8% stayed undecided. I think this just shows that these debates are important, and we can change outcome of how people think about some of these propositions. And it was really wonderful to moderate this and have a chance to talk with you all and hear your thoughts about this really important topic.
All right, thank you to Karol and the debaters for the spirited discussion. I completely agree. Forums like these are crucial to explore questions surrounding research in robotics and to inspire the future of the field. And we appreciate your work in guiding us through the nuances on this topic. And with that, we are done with the robotics debates for 2022. If you enjoyed and value these debates, and if you want to contribute next year, you can volunteer to be part of next year's organizing committee by sending us an email to roboticsdebates@gmail.com. Before we leave, I want to speak on behalf of the organizing committee and express our sincere gratitude to all of the debaters and moderators for their time and especially their moxie and commitment to exploring all sides of these important topics in our field. The ability to dig deep into these hard questions while keeping the conversation fun has made these debates a joy to experience. I also want to thank the whole team of organizers who have come together from around the world in several different time zones to brainstorm and debate the topics for this year and to set up our amazing lineup of speakers. I especially want to thank Professor Karthik Dangtut, who took the lead once I left for maternity leave, and our tech team led by Sidhu Suresh. And last but not least, we want to thank the audience. The success of these debates hinges on your participation through the polls, the questions, and the voting. And I always really enjoy watching all the voting within the questions themselves. Once again, if you love this year's debates, or if you didn't and want to see something change, or if you just want to make sure we get to enjoy more of them, then please get in touch with us and consider joining the organizing committee. With that, thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next year.